Hello, my friends. It's Danielle Frank on Beauty Uncovered, sponsored by Olaplex. And I'm going to read you a few stats that I found really fascinating. Girls' confidence in STEM fields goes down about 30% between the ages of 8 and 14, while boys are 3 times more likely to believe they would be successful as an engineer. Now, by fifth grade, girls are half as active as boys in physical activities, leading to increased risk of long-term negative health impacts. Despite equal interest in elementary school, by eighth grade, girls are half as interested in STEM careers as boys, limiting their access to opportunities in tech. I find this really fascinating because right now, women only make up 29% of the STEM workforce and only 3% of STEM CEOs. This all starts from the beginning when they were little kids. And today, we are talking to the CEO of Girls Inc. LA, Erin Ross, and she's talking about the work that they are doing in LA to really be a wonderful support to young girls as they grow up and, you know what, get that belief that they can do a lot of things and there are opportunities out there. And by the way, before we jump into this interview, post Girls Inc. in LA, 80% of girls report they believe they can be good at STEM. That's with their programming. Quite a powerful number. So with that being said, let's dive in. Erin, I'm really excited about this conversation because I remember Girls Inc. when I was young. I wasn't sure if it was the same, but apparently it was.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad
Thanks,
you're
Danielle.
here.
It's so fun to be here.
I mean, you have a really long history in like the nonprofit sector. Now, I have a sister that is a social worker. She works with a nonprofit and is CEO for that. And I sometimes look at it like that is a dedication in life that like takes superhuman strength. I'm trying to talk you up or anything, but I'm saying like, I know it is a lot emotionally, physically, all of it. What on earth inspired you to do that?
Well, I would either have to blame my parents or thank my parents, depending on the day. But I just grew up in a household. My dad was part of the VISTA program in the 70s before it was like an official. Now it's part of AmeriCorps, but
Okay.
he did like a year of national service in his early 20s where he worked on a reservation and helped the indigenous population there tap into their legal rights. Ironically, my father was never a lawyer, but it was sort of like he was a white guy, so he could help navigate systems and structures. And so that was sort of just part of his ethos. And then I can't remember a time in my childhood where my mom wasn't volunteering for a cause. So when I was really young, she helped run a daycare at the Children's Hospital for the healthy siblings.
Oh, how nice.
So that they sort of had a place to go at Children's Hospital, and she would just bring me along. So I would just go and play with these kids. And then we volunteered in politics. So it was just very much the ethos of my family that we were given a lot. And so we owed a lot. And so that was just, but I don't think I knew that it was a job. I don't think I understood that that was like a career you could have until I got to college. And I was approached by a couple of friends. They had an idea to start a nonprofit and they thought I would be a good partner. And so I sort of heard
You
them
were
out.
19.
I was 19. And I was like, yeah, I think this is something I could do. I think it's something I knew it was something I was interested in. And even then, I don't think I saw it as a career, but I ended up working basically full time the rest of my college career. So balancing running this nonprofit and going to school, I was really fortunate that the college I went to, Tufts University, was really invested in us and actually gave us our first seed money and just ended up, and it's now actually has a full college dedicated to civic life, and I serve on the board of advisors there now. But that sort of was getting its off the ground when I was a student at Tufts. And so it was the right place. And then I had the right collaborators, and we just got really lucky. And so it was the most intense education you could have to start a nonprofit.
It's like trial by fire, I would imagine.
Oh, yes. And there were some real fires, and there were some real trials, and long, complicated stories of what worked and what didn't. But it set me up for a whole career that then once I really figured out, I started running the programs for our organization. But at some points, we needed someone to lead the fundraising. And one of our mentors said, Erin's your fundraiser. You just have to teach her how to ask for money. Nobody ever did. But for me, I sort of found that passion, and it sort of went back to this idea of like, when you're given a lot, how do you help connect those resources elsewhere? And I really fell in love with this idea of being a catalyst, that there's just tremendous unmet need in our communities. And then there are people who have way more than they need. And how do I bridge that and bring people together in that way?
I mean, not for nothing, I think the skill set of asking people for money is like completely underrated, because that is a lot harder than you think. I only know that from going to Catholic school and having to sell a lot of things. And we were giving a service, but that was hard.
Oh, yeah. But I think that it's one of the best skills in life. And I think more people know how to do it than think they do. And part of that is really finding, what I always say, because like fundraising is inherently uncomfortable, right? And you are, my grandfather was an immigrant and worked really hard. And so this idea that like we would then sort of go hat in hand to somebody and ask for something was not, didn't come really naturally. But the longer I did the work, the more I saw there were really good programs out there and some not so great programs out there. And folks were going to give money. Corporations were going to give money. Foundations are legally set up to give away money. Individuals are going to give away money. And you can give them the opportunity to give their money somewhere where the impact is great. And so you're actually doing them a service. If you believe deeply in the work you're doing and the impact that the organization you're with is having, you can actually direct those dollars to a better place. And then your sort of competitive spirit kicks in. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I want to go out and get this money for my program because I know it's making a real difference.
So I have to ask, I mean, I want to talk about what led you to Girls Inc., but this kind of is a segue into it. I sometimes think like, because again, someone that is what they do. They are getting involved in these organizations, to help out. Do you have a whole methodology of like, this is a cause that I feel really good about that I want to be a part of? Or, or is it about, this is a really good organization that like has their stuff together and I want to be a part of that? Or is it something where, wow, they're really underrepresented? Like, do you have like a thought process of what attracts you?
Yeah, because I just left an organization that I worked at for 15 years. And so I had to really think about what I wanted to do next and where I thought my skills could be best utilized. And so I actually gifted myself last summer off, a thing that I was very fortunate to be in a position to do it. I had never taken a break at my previous job other than a maternity leave, which is not a break. And so it gave me a lot of time to think. And I had a lot of conversations. I talked with a wide swath of organizations, including some sort of like more for-profit social impact firms. I talked to some well-known healthcare organizations. I actually talked to like a sports organization. And what I knew was driving me is, particularly having worked in Los Angeles for almost 20 years, is I am best utilized when I see deep systemic inequities and feel like I can help move the needle there. And in particular, I see that with kids and kids of color. And so for me, I wasn't going to take any job where I didn't feel like I could really help move the needle on, the way schools are funded, the access to programs and opportunities, access to job opportunities, and even exposure to jobs. And so when I found Girls Inc., it was meeting all of that, right? Working in under-resourced communities that have been systemically, historically under-resourced. And then on top of that, working with girls, which I had been, when I was 16, my parents gave me a 1983 Jeep Wagoneer, maroon with maroon interior. It was quite a car.
That sounds hot.
It was really lovely. It still had like puffy paint on the seats that my sister had smeared from coming home from preschool, that kind of thing. But I covered that car with stickers about a woman's place is in the White House, and behind every great woman is herself. So I was really predisposed to like an early version of feminism and supporting women and girls. And then when I was in college, I actually did my big research project on the way that campaign media covered women candidates differently than their male counterparts.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was sort of, I had ended up having a whole career in educational equity and looking broadly at what, systems and structures support kids and what don't. And so this is sort of a narrowing in of, I'm still working in the same communities, in some cases, the same exact schools, but now specifically supporting women and girls. And I think it sort of is like an added layer of passion on top of all those other like non-negotiables I had for myself in my next career step.
Do you see any examples right now that you're looking at where you're like, boy, do we have a lot of work to go when it comes to that kind of underrepresentation of women?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think as we look at the pandemic in particular and what that did socially, emotionally to our girls, suicidal ideation in adolescent girls went up 51% last year. And I think it was maybe 12 or 13% for boys. So it's clear that while the pandemic was hard for everyone, it seems like girls took on more. And anecdotally, I've heard a lot about like older siblings, older sisters feeling like they needed to help their younger siblings with their, their remote schooling and those kinds of things. And then you're just at an age where your social connection is so vital to your development, to like working out your sort of social norms. And so to have had that extended period of isolation, which you just saw really substantial impacts. And then on top of that, that in some cases, then your only social outlet being social media, which we know is very challenging for our young people, and in particular our girls, to sort of separate fact from fiction and all of that. And so we've saw it a lot. And when we returned in person to schools last year at Girls Inc., we had a lot of programming planned. And what we realized is we needed to spend a lot of time with community building because the girls had just not been in a space with their peers for so long. And so some of that was just like letting them embrace that joy. And some of that was reminding them what it meant to be a good community member and a good friend in social spaces, because that had maybe been a little lost for them.
I'm actually a little surprised by the numbers, but in the same breath, not, because I do feel like females from the time that we're very young are taking on the emotional weight of a lot of things, including sometimes our parents.
I mean, and that's, and
our parents have they all probably went through a heck of a lot. I mean, I'm lucky. I've always worked from home. So
right. But you were used to it.
But I was used to it, but I see what it does. It's very stressful.
Well, in the communities we serve, a lot of those parents continued to work out of the home because they're in service industry jobs, they're in delivery, all the things that like the very privileged version of us who got to stay home and let people take care of us. Those were a lot of the parents of the girls we work with. And so they ended up taking on a maternal or paternal role in their households because their parents continued. And the really sad reality is that those are the folks who died at a much higher rate of COVID. Yeah. So you see a much higher, loss in our Black and brown communities. And those are the girls that we work with directly.
So what exactly was it about Girls Inc. that attracted you immediately? I mean, we know that you feel really strong about the feminist movement and making sure we're taking care of it from a young age. Right. But that organization in particular.
I think the reality is I didn't know a ton about Girls Inc. I sort of knew the name. I feel like
Same
Girls Inc.
here.
has done very well with brand partnerships. So, Macy's does their roll up the change once a year. And so you would see that, you would see ads. And I know, like, I knew Reese Witherspoon had supported Girls Inc., in Tennessee, and had a line of dresses for the money. So I sort of knew them more from their brand partnerships than I did from their actual work. And partly because Girls Inc. of Los Angeles is one of the much newer affiliates of the organization. So Girls Inc. nationally has been around for 158 years.
Wow.
And particularly in the Northeast are like stalwarts of the community, and a lot of them date back to when Boys and Girls Clubs merged. It left these girl spaces in communities, and Girls Inc. continued to operate. And I think the name Girls Inc. didn't fully come to be until the 70s, but some iteration of these girls clubs, these girls spaces, these centers in communities has existed for, almost 2 centuries. Wow. And so, but what's unique about Girls Inc. is each location is its own nonprofit organization. So we're affiliated as a national organization. We actually have a big presence up in Canada too. I actually just was with many of my Canadian counterparts, which is really interesting because they're dealing with very different issues than we are in the US, particularly as it relates to access to reproductive rights. But so I sort of was like, but what do they do? Because I've worked in LA Unified Schools in the nonprofit space for, almost 2 decades, and I wasn't aware of what programming Girls Inc. offered. And now I understand that they were young and sort of spread out in a variety of communities that we weren't overlapping with. So for me, I think the biggest draw was this opportunity to take this great brand and make the program sort of live up to it in this community that I cared about so much. And so I, did my homework. I made sure that the organization sort of aligned with my values, that it was, that if I was going to be working with girls, that, there was sort of an expansive definition of what a girl was, that if you had young people
Yes.
who were maybe starting to identify as a girl, that this was a place that would welcome that. I wanted the organization to, so have a sort of an inclusive view of the LGBTQA community, but also wanted there to be a clear stance on abortion rights. And Girls Inc. had all of that, which I think is incredible considering many of the communities they work in don't sort of necessarily welcome that. In some cases, whole states aren't welcoming of that. But if I was going to, work in this gender space, I wanted to make sure that it was really something I get excited about. And then I just saw tremendous opportunity. I grew my previous organization from 8 schools to 30 schools in LAUSD. I know what the need is. I know what the need is for kids to have role models and mentors that look like them, that have similar backgrounds, but are also opening their eyes to a world that can be really limited. We often hear that kids growing up in Los Angeles have never been to the beach because there aren't, it's not great public transportation. Families don't necessarily have the resources or time to do that. And I think about the girls that we work with. In some cases, they're living 15 or 20 minutes away from, in some cases, like one example, our girls live about 20 minutes away from Mattel headquarters. And it would be, sort of completely out of the realm of possibility for these girls to ever gain access and to get to go to a field trip, to see where Barbies are made, to learn what what it takes to run a toy company and a business and all that. And that's an opportunity we're going to be able to give them at Girls Inc. because we can step in and just remove these structural barriers that have been there for a long time. And it just creates so much cool opportunity. And we hope opens girls' eyes to a whole world of possibility beyond, the 4 walls of their school.
It's funny growing up. I mean, I'm 50, so it's like I go way back, and I often have conversations with my mom. I am actually a product of being able to play basketball, where they wouldn't have been teams where we
Yeah.
were beforehand. Like that was allowed. But I often talk about my mom. Like the year I was born was when she was allowed to have like things without my father
Right.
signing
Like a
on.
credit card.
And I think that that's just my lifespan, which I still feel is not that long. I mean, that is not that long ago. And that the fact that as we are going through decade after decade, me thinking about when I was a teenager and really I only had a certain amount of options at that time.
Mhm.
I think other people were exposed to certain things, but I wasn't. Um, and now to hear it, to me, it seems almost unfathomable that there are women or young ladies that aren't exposed or realize that they have that opportunity. But it's something as simple as putting somebody in place.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the other thing, so back to Mattel, they've actually been supporting this really interesting academic research that they've identified something, and there's been work done both, I think, at UCLA and at NYU, of this idea of the dream gap. And starting as young as 5 years old, girls stop aspiring to the same level of careers as their male counterparts.
Mm.
And so to me, that's devastating. I have a 5-year-old son. He thinks he can be literally anything in the world. And the fact that girls would start to see cues from society that say, like, well, there's never been a woman president. And there, you don't see a lot of, the STEM careers is still, I think, less than a quarter of people working in STEM fields are women. I think it's fewer than 5% of CEOs. And so you don't see yourself necessarily in these career paths. And so that's a big thing we're trying to tackle is how do you keep that aspirational spirit? And a lot of it is exposure, right? It is, I was fortunate recently to meet a woman who was an astronaut. And she was the first Muslim woman to go to space.
Wow.
So for her to come and talk to our girls about what that journey looked like, are they thinking they could be astronauts right now? And they're talking about a lot of the next space exploration in the US is going to be heavily female driven. So the girls will get to see themselves in this, but only if we're consistent in showing them that.
I live right by NASA, so it's very exciting over here. We get very excited about that stuff. I get it. And it's funny because you see progression. My eldest is 24, and I remember when he was in high school, he started taking stuff like robotics, and he was taking computer programming, and it was really all boys. And he had a female teacher, brilliant woman. And I remember her approaching my son and saying, hey, Wolf, how would you like to go with me over to the middle school and talk to the girls to come, talk about how much fun programming is? And he's like, yeah, but why girls? And she explained it to him. To this day, my son is very adamant about making sure that girls have an opportunity. Like he didn't realize there was a disparity, even though he was in a room with all boys.
Right. Because if that's all you ever experience and see, then you start to just think that's normal. And I think that's a big thing is like, there are real systems that need to be disrupted.
The conversation has to be had. Because I think that a lot of times, like I said, it's not like my son wasn't open to it.
Right.
He's not going to argue with you.
But I just think that's the thing is that there is still a need to plant those seeds early and then cultivate them and to continue, right? Because as girls get older, they get this deluge of societal messages about their role, about their appearance, all these things. And so we can't just run one STEM workshop with second graders and then walk away and say oh, our job here is done. It is the continual exposure and then really starting to quiet those doubts and those voices as they come in. And so we've been really deliberate about, as we build out our program, we're trying to do it in feeder patterns of schools so that you have Girls Inc. in elementary school. And then we're still there at middle school. And then eventually we have plans to expand to high school so that we can be consistent for them so that as society starts to push these other messages, we're there to counter them. And more importantly, that they're countering them themselves because of the foundation that's been built.
I think also in a kid's life, especially when you're being raised in a situation that is not ideal, it's nice to know that you have a partnership. I find that sometimes we have these great programs for these little kids and it's wonderful. We're exposing them. But then once we go, okay, bye.
Right.
And they don't feel
Best
like
of
they
luck
have
to
a
you.
partnership with like, no one's going to check on me.
Right. Well, and all the research says that one caring adult outside of home can be make or break for kids.
Wow.
And so for us, we're trying to, our board members are like, can't we serve 1,000 girls this year? And I'm like, not yet, because we have to keep a really strong ratio of adults to kids. Yeah. Because that's the other thing is you want to make sure that every girl in our program is seen. And that, so, there's not just one instructor at the front of the classroom. Sorry, I have ink all over my hands, my child. But that, that we have volunteers that are circulating and that we are bringing in instructors who are really comfortable with girls in that youth development space, with a growth mindset, just sort of bringing a different lens to this work so that they don't get lost in the shuffle, which is a thing that can happen in a big public school when teachers are, totally under supported and are asked to take on gigantic classrooms. We're trying to keep Girls Inc. a deliberately small space so the girls feel a tighter community.
So if you were thinking about like right now, what are the resources you desperately need to have come into your organization? Like, let's put it out in the universe. Like,
right.
I'm thinking like, what are those resources that like, hey, immediate need. And then like, boy, this would really make a big impact for us.
Well, at the end of the day, a nonprofit needs to keep its lights on, needs to pay its employees. So financial resources are just vital and critical. And so we're grateful that actually a company like Olaplex is supporting us and sponsors us. And, we've really been able to build a strong community of support in the year that I've been leading Girls Inc. in Los Angeles. So, we will never say no to a check. Well, that's not true. We will say no to some checks depending on where it comes from and what the motive is. But for the most part, but then I think the other thing is that we really need people power. And, I will not be unique in saying it is hard right now to hire really amazing part-time staff. And we pay well, but it's just a tough market, right? And particularly we're looking for folks for, 18 to 20 hours a week where they're coming in just in the afternoons. So we're fortunate that we found an incredible cadre of leaders, of program instructors to do that. But it was not an easy thing. And then similarly, we're really looking to have 2 to 3 volunteers in every classroom. And they have to be highly vetted. To volunteer in an LA school, you have to be background checked. You actually have to get a TB test, which I like. I want to be bringing in highly vetted people into
people
spaces
taking
with
care
students.
of themselves and making sure they're doing the right thing for themselves.
Yes, as both a mom and an organizational leader, I'm okay with having to jump through a few hoops to do that. But I think and then the sort of final piece is that those partnerships, those brand partnerships, because, bringing the girls to Mattel, bringing the girls to, Free People. We just had a conversation, Free People bringing some of their, the folks who do their Free People movement, which is their like athletic wear brand. They have all these ambassadors who are athletes and instructors. And so bringing those women to the school to lead a boxing class or a dance class or something with our girls, it's so deeply meaningful to our girls to have people come to them, to see where they live. I think people have a lot of misconceptions about what, an under-resourced urban school looks like. And I love bringing people into school spaces and sort of demystifying that for them. no, you don't walk through a metal detector at an elementary school. There's actually no metal detectors in LA schools, which you would never know based on Hollywood's
No, you wouldn't
version.
know that. I'll be honest.
Let's be clear, there are some wands, but nobody is walking through an airport style metal detector on their way into school. And schools are filled with children and laughter and art on the walls, no matter where they're growing up. And so I think also sort of breaking down some of that, those misconceptions so that we can bring people into the school. So our girls see that someone came to them that cared enough to, brave LA traffic to come and be at their school is really a magical thing. So we're always looking for partners in that space to, do you work at a cool place where we could host a field trip? Do you have a cool experiment you could bring to our schools so our girls can start to see themselves as aviation engineers or whatever?
Right. Wow. I love that. I have to ask, I don't know why I got stuck on this thought, but when you're saying that you get 2 volunteers to go, ideally into each classroom, what is their participation in that? Knowing that, obviously it's boys and girls, but if they're representing girls, what is their role in all that?
So when we run all girls spaces after school. And so they're coming into our dedicated space. And so
I thought it was for me, I'm sorry, I was thinking that it was during the whole school day. And I was like,
oh no. And we're going to get there. We're going to run some of those programs eventually, but we create an all girls space and all people who identify as girls, I want to name. But so we have a clubhouse and we are trying to keep it at 20, 25 girls. You can't have one instructor creating meaningful, both leading interactive activities, because that's the other thing. We want all of our programming to be hands-on and mind on. So you can't, it's not just someone lecturing, here's the history of women in America and what oppression looked like. It's we're learning how to build a house today, and we're going to do it with marshmallows and toothpicks. And so we're going to learn the value of a strong foundation, as part of an architecture unit. And so at that point, mainly the volunteers are there to stop them from eating all the marshmallows. But it is actually about, being able to break the girls into small groups, to have someone who can check in individually. When you see a student is struggling, or you see maybe something bubbling up between a couple girls, having those extra eyes who can help, step in, support, check in.
And do they get training on how to handle that? Because I can honestly say not everybody knows.
Oh,
not
no.
everyone knows how to handle this.
No. And we are, yes. So we do a lot of trainings it's a big commitment to be an in-classroom volunteer, less so to be a corporate volunteer and come for a cleanup day or, a fun Friday where we're just letting the girls hula hoop and play soccer on the blacktop. But if you're going to commit to being a classroom volunteer with us, we do pretty intensive training. We do regular check-ins. And then one of the big things is, sad to say, but everybody who works in our classrooms has to be trained as what we call mandated reporters. Mm-hmm. So those are folks who, if they identify any, sign of neglect, abuse, the challenge and opportunity of building meaningful individual relationships with girls is things are more likely to come up. Right. Girls are more likely to talk about something that's going on at home, something that's going on at school. So we want to make sure our folks are prepared for that. So they have to go through a training where they are both looking for signs of that and understand the steps if they need to elevate something.
And I think that's incredibly important because I think that it was so underreported for so long. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that things have significantly changed, but I think that the awareness has changed things. And if we're able to kind of help them when they're young, that's huge.
Yeah. And some of it is, doesn't need to be elevated at the school, but is relationship stuff and friendship stuff. And, I feel like every time in my life I've had something like that, just talking it through with someone has made a huge difference. And so having enough people in the classroom to be able to make those moments happen is really important.
Well, I think this is such a great organization. I love that you're doing all this and
Thank
that
you.
it is a passion of yours. And I want to tell all our listeners, if you go into description, we're going to have a link to Girls Inc. Los Angeles. And if you want to donate, or if you happen to be in the area and you want to contact them, it will take to their website. Go on there, take a look. It's actually beautifully designed. We were
Thank
talking
you.
about that. It's beautifully designed,
Well,
easy to navigate. You can get great information.
I was going to say, it also has just gorgeous portraits of our girls. We did a 2-day photo shoot and video shoot last year. And it was really fun to see them go from being self-conscious to complaining they weren't getting sufficient airtime.
Oh, they look like beautiful, confident queens.
Yes. There's a couple. There's some who like leaned right up against the wall and like had their pose ready to go.
I love it.
And others where you really had to sort of get them, and we had this amazing photographer who just helped them come out of their shells. And I love that is what you see when you visit our website.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming in here and telling us all about it. I felt like I learned so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm just so grateful. It's, as you said, I'm deeply passionate about this, and I just feel so fortunate to get to have a platform like this to talk about it.